Okay, so I wanted to make this video because I keep seeing a bunch of bad press about there's this game called Valorant, and it's made by a company called Riot Games, and there's a lot of bad press going around about it. So it says Vanguard rootkit here, why people are leaving Valorant, uh, why you shouldn't install Valorant. This guy talks about it being a rootkit. Um, Real story behind Valorant's anti-cheat. And then this video that I'm on right here, it's called Programmer Explains the Valorant Vanguard Virus, Valorant Anti-Cheat Explained. And I mean, the video is 17 minutes long. I'm not going to play it for you, but you can find it. But essentially, this is a student at a university studying, I think, computer science, and he talks about Oslo University, and he works on operating systems and programs and assembly and things like that. So if you look at the other videos on my channel, we do that stuff too. And I used to be a malware researcher, and I was a product security engineer at a device company, and now I actually work as a security engineer at an operating system company. But I have a professional background in code security and product security, application security, and malware. And I wanted to just kind of clarify a couple of things. So it's important when you're hearing media like this to actually look at the facts and to make your own conclusions rather than just to kind of jump on the hype train and just start believing things. So there's a few facts that I wanted to show you about Riot Games, and you can make your own conclusions based off of them. But the first thing is that Riot Games has a bug bounty program. Now, if you're not familiar with what a bug bounty program is, it is basically a public calling for security researchers and hackers to try to find security vulnerabilities in a software product, and they report those vulnerabilities to the program in exchange for monetary rewards or other rewards, but usually the best ones have monetary rewards. Okay, so one thing you'll note about companies that actually do have secure software is they tend to have a bug bounty program. So let's just take a look at this real quick. But before I go to Riot Games, let's look at this. So Verizon Media has one, okay? And Verizon Media has had security issues before. Companies that won't admit that they had security issues are usually just bogus. They're lying, or they're trying to avoid it, and they actually do have security issues, and they're just not willing to admit it or acknowledge it. And that's generally bad in the security space. I'm sure many people who watch my channel know this. So you can see here Verizon Media has 5,899 reports resolved. They have 56 different products in scope, and the average bounty is $400 to $500. And then over here you can see that it usually takes them 7 hours to reply when you submit something. Average days to bounty, 13 days. And 96% of the reports meet the response standards. Verizon Media has awarded total $9,380,000. Okay, so and then they go on to describe what's called the scope and the rules of engagement, which essentially says, this is what you can attack and try to hack, and this is what you can't. There are certain systems they don't want you to attack, and certain types of attacks they don't want you to do. So, for example, if you were going to try to bring down their server by sending like 5 million requests or something like that, that's usually going to be out of scope because they don't want you to bring down their actual server and therefore put all their customers out of service. Okay, so you can read more about this, but the point that I want you to take from this is that these big companies that actually do care, like Verizon Media is one of them. There are many other companies that have such programs. I'm trying to think of another one right now. There is a company called Okta, which is another security company. If we go here, they have a bug bounty program. I misspelled it, but Theirs is on a platform called BugCrowd, which is the other major ones. There's HackerOne and BugCrowd, right? And see, you can see here, there's similar statistics. They're much smaller than Verizon, so they're not. But even they, I mean, they're offering $15,000 for the top reward. So programs that like this, this is generally a good sign, because what it tells you is that a company cares about security. It tells you that they're willing to put money into it. I mean, those are the facts. I mean, you could even see the statistics. Sometimes you could even see who was rewarded, how many people they rewarded. So those are generally a good sign. Now, if you go and you look up some software and there's no bug bounty program, that's usually a worse sign, because that means that, they either don't care about security, or, maybe they're not willing to admit it, or maybe they just don't want to put money into it. And, I'm not saying those companies are bad, but it could just be that they have a low budget, or it's just not an area of concern for them too. Because there are some companies that just, security is not a big of a deal. And that's true, right? A restaurant website, they don't need to have a bug bounty program usually, because they're not taking payments or doing a lot of sensitive transactions and things like that, right? That's just an example, right? So now let's go ahead and go back here and let's look at this. Let's look at Riot. So Riot actually does have a bug bounty program as well, and right now they've acknowledged the fact that this kernel driver that they're installing on your machine as a gamer, as part of the anti-cheat, is an area of concern for them, and that they are willing to pay hackers who find security vulnerabilities. This is good, because rather than take those vulnerabilities and run, or sell them to somebody else, or exploit them, there's a good chance that if somebody finds a vulnerability, they're going to report it, because they're going to get paid up to $100,000 to do so. If you get code executions, $100,000. That's a lot of money. Bug bounty programs typically pay between $500 to $2,000, $4,000, $5,000. But for something like this, they typically do offer more. $100,000 is a pretty good amount of money. I mean, that's what some people will earn in worldwide hacking challenges. Some of the best hackers in the world will earn money like this. So that's a good sign, because if somebody does find this, they're less likely to write a malware or exploit it, and they are more likely to just submit it to Riot Games and get paid $100,000, right? So that's a good sign. Now, there are other things that I want to clear up. So in this video here, this programmer explains the Valorant Vanguard virus anti-cheat thing. He calls it a rootkit, and it's funny because he actually talks about how people, get terms wrong and things like that. But even just calling this a rootkit is actually incorrect. You can see here he says Valorant's anti-cheat Vanguard is a rootkit. That's not correct, and I'm going to show you why. So let's go to Google and let's look up definition of rootkit. Rootkit: a set of software tools that enable an unauthorized user to gain control of a computer system without being detected. It's a type of a malware. Okay, and the key thing here is an unauthorized user to gain control of a computer system without being detected. By definition, Vanguard is not a rootkit because it's not unauthorized. It's officially signed by Riot Games. It's officially signed by Microsoft as a kernel driver. And it's not hidden. I mean, when you as the gamer, when you install it, they let you know that you're installing this anti-cheat system, and there's fine print that explains some of this stuff and tells you, and you have to agree to install this, is what I'm trying to say. And so because you're agreeing to install it, this is not a rootkit. A rootkit would be something that just installed itself quietly and you had no idea it existed and is trying to hide from you as a user. So this is, and the intent behind the program is that it is an anti-cheat program. It's not a malware, right? If it was a malware, Microsoft wouldn't have signed it. It wouldn't be allowed to be distributed. Microsoft could get in trouble if they're signing and allowing malicious drivers to be distributed. Now, caveat to that is that there is a small chance that there could be something malicious in there. But let me explain this to you. All drivers have control of the code running in the kernel. And he explains that you can look up this, what is the kernel, what is ring zero, all this kind of stuff on your own, because it's a lot to explain. But essentially, as this programmer talks about here, as this Jonal gaming guy does talk about, something that is a driver or installed in what's called ring zero, or the kernel, it does have a very high level of control over the system. It is very powerful. But what I want to explain here is that all drivers do. Any driver does. So your mouse driver does. Your keyboard driver does. Your antivirus, if you have antivirus, that also has drivers. In fact, I think Symantec has like 5 or 6 drivers that it installs. Those also are all, having this type of access to your computer behind your back, so to speak. Or, you don't know exactly what's going on there, right? Any device you have connected to your computer has a driver, right? The motherboard itself has a driver. Motherboard has firmware even, so that's even a slightly lower level than that. All these different systems can run things at ring zero, and for example, your disk, right? Your hard drive, your solid state drive, they have drivers. There's a lot of drivers that are running, and maybe I'll do another video if people want it, and I can show you how to show all your drivers. But there's tons of drivers, and you might be running like 60, 70, 80 different drivers on the computer at any given time, and they all have this level of access. So it kind of doesn't make sense to me, even as a security professional, that people are suddenly picking on this particular Riot Games Vanguard anti-cheat driver and acting like it has some power that is not common in software to have. It's not true. There's tons of drivers out there, and just up until recently, back 20 years ago, they weren't signed, they weren't verified. Basically, anytime you installed a new device or got a new printer or something, by the way, printers also have drivers. Then you kind of just taken the publisher's word for it. In fact, people would go to these driver download websites and download drivers from there even. So I'm not endorsing letting code run on your computer that you don't know about, but that's just the reality of things. And the reality here is that if somebody does actually analyze it, and that's the thing too, is at the end of the day, none of these claims that I'm seeing, I read a article earlier. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see, Vanguard, Riot Games. So this one right here by Hotspawn says Riot's Vanguard anti-cheat remains a security risk. So in this, it says, okay, so right here, this block, my main concerns are the intrusive nature of Vanguard due to it running on boot and at the kernel level. There is a potential for abuse by either a malicious actor or Riot themselves, Humphreys explained. To oversimplify it, kernel mode is basically giving an application unfettered access to your computer. This allows an application to view and alter anything running on your PC. The benefits of this when running anti-cheat is the application is capable of seeing any potential cheats without having to worry about permission levels. My concern would be that it can also see anything else on your computer. Vanguard is a huge violation of privacy and right for abuse. All it would take would be one vulnerability or one malicious actor at Riot pushing some nefarious code, and then millions of users could have their data compromised. Well, guess what? That's true for all drivers in any different publisher. So that's also true for antiviruses, all antiviruses. That's also true for your printer company, Hewlett-Packard, when they install drivers. That's true for your cool RGB, Corsair, special lit up keyboard and mouse, right? Your Razer stuff. Those things all use drivers, and they all have unfettered access to the kernel. And they all could be exploited, and they can all have security vulnerabilities in them. So this is an example of people in the media and, basically misinformed people on YouTube who are just blowing something out of proportion. And I'm not saying that Riot Games' driver doesn't have vulnerabilities, and I'm not saying that it's not exploitable. I'm not even saying that it doesn't have some, hidden malicious code installed by them in there. But what I'm saying is the arguments don't make sense. And a good argument here would be, the reality is nobody's given any detail. They're just speculating. They're saying this thing could be bad. This could happen, and that's a major issue in information security and code security right now. Is that people just make these claims. The media does it all the time, and there's no evidence here. So the proper way to handle something like this is for somebody to get the driver, or download this Vanguard thing and install it, and then use the tools that I have on my channel that I've shown, IDA Pro, Radair 2, and other binary analysis tools. Even do a little kernel debugging, maybe using WinBag or WinDebug, as it's called. You can look that up as well. And look at the code. Look at the assembly language code. Decompile the code. There's free decompilers now. The NSA released a tool called Ghidra, Ghidra. You can decompile a driver, back up into C code, and look through the code, and you can see what you can find. And you can also monitor the machine using Process Monitor, Windows sysinternals tools. You have a lot of tools at your disposal to go ahead and analyze this thing and see what it's really doing. Okay? And until somebody does that and shows that it's doing something malicious, as far as I'm concerned, this is not a malicious thing, right? Now, as a user, yeah, you absolutely have it right. If you don't like the sound of this, don't play the game. Don't install it. But to go and call this thing a rootkit without any evidence of it doing anything malicious it's absurd. And unfortunately, what it does is it's like crying wolf, and it sort of distorts the information security industry and the software industry too. Now, there are other concerns that exist with this thing. Okay, so let me see if I can find this real quick. I think it was called, let's see, Riot Games Vanguard VGK.sys. So I saw a Reddit article. BSOD, here we go. BSOD VGK.sys, Valorant. So there are other issues with this thing, and I might be more concerned about these issues. So what it's doing here is it's crashing a lot of people's computer. And there's a bunch of people that are on this thread here that have apparently gotten blue screens of death. And because it does start when the computer boots, some people are even kind of locked out of their computer, because as soon as the computer boots up, the driver loads and then it crashes, right? So this is probably not malicious. This is probably just a bug in the driver. The downside to having a driver like this is that the code needs to be extremely well tested and extremely reliable, because it is running in kernel. Any type of a crash in the kernel stops the whole computer. And why does that happen? It happens because the kernel is running the computer itself. It's running the physical hardware. So if a crash occurs in the kernel, so if a crash occurs in, like, for example, Firefox, which is where I'm right now, Firefox can just end, and then you can just restart Firefox. And the thing that's ending and restarting Firefox is the operating system. It allows you to do that. However, when the driver crashes, the operating system itself has crashed. So there's nothing. You can't just close it and restart it, because the operating system has stopped. It's halted. So the only way to restart and get out of that is to restart the machine, right? So if you have a driver that is not well tested and is crashing people's computers like this over and over, that's bad. And it's actually kind of interesting, because from a business perspective, the whole reason why they wanted to do this anti-cheat, this Vanguard thing, is because they want to keep their users happy, because players will start to quit a game if they're constantly being hacked and people are cheating, right? However, it seems that this Vanguard thing is driving a lot of people off, either for these suspicions about the security and privacy, or just because it seems to be maybe unreliable and not that well tested. So I'm not saying that I agree with their approach, but I'm just saying that to call this thing a rootkit and to say that it's malware it's a bit heavy until somebody proves it, and I suspect there's going to be more analysis online. But if you want to actually take a look at this and get into it, check out some of my other videos. Where I go over the tool Radair 2. I have IDA Pro videos. These are disassemblers. These are things what you can do is you could take this VGK.sys thing and you can open it up in IDA Pro or Radair, and you could look at the code yourself to see what it's doing. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up a bit. And before I go, in case you are wondering and you're not familiar with kernel mode and drivers and things like that, the reason why they've done this is because cheating program. Okay, so a cheater is running a program on their computer, and a cheater is doing it intentionally. And so, because of the way these operating systems work, a cheater will give administrative access and control to the cheating program, either that they developed or they downloaded from somebody else, maybe unknowncheats.com or something. And that gives the hack program a lot of power, usually over the game. A person who owns the computer and owns their operating system can do things that inhibit anti-cheat that is not running in the kernel. And so, in order to combat the cheating, companies like Riot Games and several others now, and by the way, antivirus companies all do this too, is they install a driver so that way they have more control over these hacking programs. Because now, in order to actually defeat the anti-cheat, somebody's going to have to go into the kernel and basically attack it in the kernel, which is harder to do. It is more likely to fail, and it overall is just it adds another level of complexity to basically hacking the game. So in order to get more control over the cheats, that's why they have created this kernel driver code, and it does give it more power over the machine, but it also gives them more power over the cheaters. And again, antivirus does that too. If you're running Norton Antivirus, McAfee, they all have drivers, and they're doing basically the same thing. They're because viruses and malware and worms, they do the same thing that cheats do, that hacks do, is they're going to be trying to leverage power over to subvert and get around the antivirus, just like cheaters are trying to leverage, are basically trying to subvert and get around the anti-cheat, anti-hack stuff. So I just wanted to shed some light into that. If you want to learn more about that stuff, check out my other videos. But yeah, I mean, it just didn't seem fair to me. And I'm a very paranoid person. I work in information security. I'm dealing with hacks every single day, exploits, operating system stuff, C++ programming, assembly language. And I mean, you could look at my other videos, but at the end of the day, though, security, you have to be practical about it. And a lot of these claims are being made by people who are not security professionals, who do not really know what's going on. They heard something, and then they're going around spreading this knowledge or this misinformation that this thing's a rootkit, which I showed you is not by definition a rootkit. And they're saying that this thing is scary and it's not safe and all this stuff, and it's kind of bizarre when we've been having kernel drivers for since Windows has existed. So that's all I got to say about that. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comments. All right, thank you.